photography relies on what you find in the world, and a photo project will take its shape as you move along. I don't want my work to just be about social documentary issues. It's not just that approach. To me, I want the work to go farther and get at something more about how humanity endures on such a fucked up world.
Hi there. Bryan Schutmaat is a thoughtful, hard-working photographer who, in a relatively short period of time, has developed an eloquent photographic voice. His images resonate with viewers because they hold no superficiality or pretense. They cut through the small talk of imagery and convey quiet but fierce emotions. He isn't pushing any angles, even though there are plenty of themes that emerge through his work. He's conveying to us, the viewer, what it feels like to be in the situations in which he finds himself. Because he's curious about the people and places he photographs, we as viewers become lured into the experience and begin imagining the stories associated with these interactions. As a photographer, you can't fake this type of authenticity. On a practical level, it requires the self-discipline of putting in the time, being on the road, being prepared to stop the car, get out, talk to strangers, or to discover why a certain place holds weight for one.
I think curiosity and inspiration are linked in terms of photography, and inspiration isn't something that always comes easy. It's a result of discipline or just going out and shooting whenever you're in the field. So sometimes on some days I don't feel that curious, but I still go out and look around anyway because I know something will emerge. Generally, I really like being away from home, and it's something that's just probably inherent in me, I would say. I've always liked seeing what's in the next town over, or I feel at home on the road, I'd say. And it maybe is a curiosity that comes from youth and looking at things.
I get excited and I want to get things right, and I think that there's a little bit of jitters, even if it's like I'm on the side of the road and no one's around, and I see a landscape I really love, or I'm with a portrait subject that I think is amazing. The pressure to get that right kind of jostles me a little bit.
This genuine desire to discover what lies beneath the surface requires a vigor that's often accompanied by a sense of loneliness. When one ultimately makes a photograph that embodies meaning, it's exhilarating and helps to build a sense of purpose. He first came to the photo world's attention with his project Graze the Mountain Sends, a series of portraits and landscapes of small, almost forgotten communities in the Rocky Mountains. Schutmaat grew up in the suburbs of Houston. He was a skateboarding punk rocker who became fascinated by the landscape of the American West as he traveled about with his punk band looking for gigs. Even though the street aesthetic doesn't come through in his work, Winogrand was his first photographic hero. He stumbled upon an exhibition in Nashville and the photographs blew him away. He bought himself a 35mm Minolta and his journey began. He had studied history and was en route to becoming a high school history teacher. But his growing passion for photography sidelined that plan. As I mentioned, Graze the Mountain Sends was his breakthrough project. The images of landscapes and people within this book interact to create a rhythm. His portraits become the foundation of the publication. They provide the emotional substance. The landscapes then contribute a sense of place and give the essay depth. He wanted viewers to feel their way into the essay emotionally, connecting on a human level to what they see in the sitter's eyes. The landscapes then present a more sweeping perspective that embodies these senses. As we look at the photographs, this communication isn't something that one can accurately define. One has to feel it, because the interplays are subtle.
A lot of this comes from intuition when you're out there, and whenever you're shooting, you don't always know why you're shooting something. You know, a very large part of the photo making process deals with this intuition that you have, and you just go with it, and then you get back to the editing room and make sense of all of this, the stuff you get from after you cast a wide net.
He was living in Montana when he developed this project and became interested in the small towns around the region, particularly the mining towns. He also discovered the writings of Richard Hugo, a poet who lived much of his life in Montana. The line "Graze the mountain sends" appears in his poem Degrees of Grey in Philipsburg. Hugo at some time also said that knowing can be a limiting thing. During Schutmaat's wanderings, he embraced this idea. He wasn't trying to produce a straight documentary account of the region. He saw the places, the towns, and the people as potential elements within a poetic visual story. The American West's cultural identity has been shaped by its proximity to wilderness. But as the land has been tamed and populated, what one now observes is inconsistent with the mythical promises of the past. Schutmaat's pictures of interiors with paintings and photos of the outdoors illustrate this chasm and underscore how idealized the earlier perceptions of the West had been.
In the representation of the American West, I've always been interested in the distance between the historic, almost mythic promise of the American West and the realities that are actually faced there. So throughout history, so many people went west in search of prosperity, to go find new horizons, to find something better for their lives. And then upon arrival, so many people found that no, we're not in the promised land, and there is no bounty here, and those dreams that were hoped for don't exist.
Growing up in Houston meant that Schutmaat was exposed to the oil industry and the culture that surrounds it. When he was a boy, his father worked in construction and initiated him into the informal nature of working class interactions. This shaped how, as a photographer, he interacted with the people that he met and photographed. He gave an example of how this casual understanding unfolded with one of his sitters. He made a portrait of a guy named Ken who worked at a truck stop, and he returned a couple of months later eager to show Ken the photo, thinking that he would be really pleased by what he saw. All Ken said was, "It looks like me." Now that's a great reality check that every photographer needs, because it takes away any pretensions of intellectual superiority and forces one to engage on a no bullshit level.
I picked up this hitchhiker named Joe, and he was outside a little town in New Mexico called Magdalena, and he was headed to the Permian oil fields to try to find work, but he hadn't any experience in the industry, and he was just getting in the car and going. And I think that experience made me realize that there was so much narrative and an emotional possibility in the characters you'd meet just on the side of the roads. So he was someone who really influenced me to go in this direction. I do think that there is something about how I look on the road or who I am, because I'm basically living out of a tent and out of my car and just wandering around, and I'm a tumbleweed running into other tumbleweeds, and I can make deep connections with people in a relatively short amount of time and try to get great photography. Sometimes I'm camping out with guys and drinking with them and eating hot dogs and stuff or whatever. It's just yeah, we're just guys hanging out.
I remember looking through this book and trying to figure out what particularly made it stand out for me. I finally figured out that above all else, it was Schutmaat's ability to photograph men in a highly perceptive manner. His subjects aren't projected as heroic patriarchal figures. Rather, they are complex human beings who've been weathered by life. And somehow Schutmaat manages to delve beneath their masks to reveal vulnerability and sometimes pain. His work is ultimately about the generations of men who have battled a trail through the American West. He said that it's about the hopes, efforts, and failures of his American forefathers.
With photography, which I think of as a form of art or literature, there is a power to a photographic portrait that reflects human experience. And people can identify with that, and we relate to that. Sorrow, vulnerability, these are the things that are, I think, worth showing at times. And if you want to have like a power to your work or a narrative potential, it is about those things in life that aren't so easy sometimes.
He also believed that on some level he was attempting to make portraits of his own father as he explored their relationship. There's a single image of a woman from Wyoming. He took a portrait of her looking into camera, but for him the communication was too forthright. His thinking again returned to Richard Hugo's poem, Degrees of Grey in Philipsburg. The final few lines mention a slender girl who served food, and Hugo's memory of her was, using the words from his poem, "Her red hair lights the wall." Schutmaat wanted his Wyoming woman to remain anonymous, so not necessarily capturing an all-encompassing portrait, but rather what she symbolized, someone who offered the men she served a fleeting charm. The picture was also a nod to William Eggleston's famous image, a redhead ordering food at a roadside stand. For his project Sons of the Living, Schutmaat changed to monochrome. He documented how the sometimes ruthless encroachment into the American West had left its mark on the terrain, and how in turn the environment had etched itself into the faces of the people who lived there. It's a broad visual account of the struggles of drifters and working-class commuters that he met during his travels, and it's set against the stark landscape of the West. One can gather from the book's design that Schutmaat was consciously or unconsciously building a layered poetic essay while he was out photographing. Each section, or as he refers to them, stanzas, ends with a night shot which provides an ending to the notion of a verse, and it offers an invitation for the viewer to turn to the next.
I have these pictures of headlights going through landscapes, and it's this descent into night. So each stanza is what I call them, ends in a photo that is a kind of a descent in the night, and you see these headlights that I think of like this symbol of the human presence and something spiritual moving through the land, and then it goes into night again. So that kind of rhythm was really important to me, to have that motif repeat, and then we have a new day with new characters to kind of look into.
Did that as an experiment really early on in the project, just seeing these headlights going across the highway in the distance on this big sage flat. And I got the photo back, and they had this meaning to me, you know. It was like a human presence in this eternal emptiness. And then I took that to places where the geology was even more impressive, and throughout the deserts. And it just became this symbol for me of the human presence in a world that's kind of cold and empty.
I'll end with a sad essay called Good Goddamn, about the last days of freedom before Schutmaat's friend Chris had to report for a prison term. It's a melancholic account of this time they spent together. Schutmaat captures Chris drinking Coors Light, smoking and shooting with his hunting rifle. It's not an epic story, but it's one that everyone can relate to. There's nothing uplifting about these last moments of freedom, because the weight of the sentence weighs heavily upon them. I hope you enjoyed the work as much as I did, and I'll see you next time.
I want to talk to people and learn about them and riff with them and shit. Like, I don't want to just go click the shutter and be done with it. And I'd rather like sit down with a just an interesting person I meet in some small town. Those experiences are so powerful to me and profound at times. And that's why I like to photograph ordinary people that have really interesting stories.